Good evening and good day. So, I've been reflecting on what a proper functioning priestly class would look like, and I was trying to draw from some various traditions and reading a few old books and comparing the different theories they had of it. And it pushed me to start reflecting and thinking about exactly what kind of pastor should belong to this particular class. And ended up really liking the description of the class and the criterion as expressed in the Bible, right? And and just how to conceptualize and to define how this group should look like and what the mission should be. And so, yeah, basically, I'm thinking of what's the function of the priestly class. I'm thinking that they're the ones who deal with the universals, right? They're the ones who are meant to guide humanity. If you look beyond the anthropological view of the priest, what are they supposed to be doing? You notice that they're guides, because the priest is analogous to the elder, who is analogous to the pastor, the bishop, the overseer, right? In various communities and in various social arrangements. Why is it that people would come for them for justice or for blessings, right? There's some things that they understand. There's some things they can reveal. There are answers that they can give. And so they build this institution, and I think this institution is supposed to be the pillar and the foundation of truth, right? And they are the ones who are supposed to communicate, discern, and protect these ultimate values that they're supposed to embody and allow the people to coexist, right? If you, yeah, if you hold on to, if you agree with Rene Girard's observations about what the role and the purpose of religion is in a community, right? It's to tie them together, right? And if you look like in philosophy of religion, right? When you go about defining religion, ultimately you find that there's an orientation towards ultimate concern. And so I think that the priestly class is tied to the universal, right? That which binds all human beings together, and then it flows into the community and into the family and into the individual, and the individual adds back all the way into it, right? So it's this circle, right? And so in light of that, they also turned out that they are custodians of mysteries, right? And there'll be different mysteries. So, for example, a problem to answer is who belongs to the community, right? What makes us one, right? And that idea of defining it as pillar and foundation of truth, I borrowed from the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 3, verse 15, which I found to be quite the interesting passage, right? And it's the way that Paul defines the church, right? That the church of the living God is the strong foundation of truth, right? And so that's now what's giving me the idea, or what's pushing me to conceptualize of it as the institution that's supposed to be the pillar and the foundation of the truth, right? And if they collapse, what is the action that people are supposed to take, right? And I'll think about comparing Jesus versus Evola, right? Of how to be a man in the ruins. Evola pushes for the individual to become an aristocrat of the soul, right? But then Jesus pushes the people to rally around and build parallel institutions, right? When reading Augustine, The City of God, right? Once the society collapses, like Rome becomes rotten, Rome becomes weak, and it collapses, what remains? If you have two parallel institutions existing alongside each other and one's fall apart, the other one remains. And so the Jesus solution for living in the ruins is build parallel institutions, but then for Evolas is to be an aristocrat of the soul, and you're waiting for the great man. But then the Jesus approach is you build this parallel institution, and then this parallel institution is supposed to be the womb by which the great man shall emerge. So under Evola, you are tied to the age, right? Let's say in the age of Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, right? There is no stake. You just have to wait for the cycle to finish. But then under Jesus, it's the cycle does not the stage of the cycle, right? The age that you live in is purely dependent on the spirit that the community chooses to embody. And so you can move from a golden age into Kali Yuga in few years, right? Or You can remain in the golden age for centuries, or you can remain in the dark age for centuries, right? And so the Jesus approach would push the aristocrats of the soul to build parallel institutions with the aim that from them shall emerge a golden age. Yes, and funny enough, like another contrast that when I was comparing the state of the current pillar and the foundation of truth, the institutions that are supposed to serve this priestly function in our community, and the traditional one, I find that there is quite a significant amount of difference, right? So you find that in our modern world, those who are supposed to serve as the priests of our community are conditioned, right? And even though that because you could specifically have to think of it in terms of function. Like this institution, what role is it playing in the community? And so in your community, under what does your community consider to be the pillar and the foundation of truth? That institution the institution that's supposed to do that for your community, that is your priestly class. So if it's going to be the press, it's going to be the university, where the scribes are connected. And so it's not specifically connected. So that's the sense in which it's connected to religion, because it's about ultimate ideals, it's about truth, right? But then in the traditional frame, people were initiated into the priestly class, right? But then in our world, we are conditioned into the priestly class, right? And perhaps one day I'll get more into the contrasting the Game of Thrones versus the Game of Generations, because I think that the current regime, right, is playing a Game of Thrones, but the ancient regime, or the fallen, there was a period that there was a regime that was playing the Game of Generations, and that is why the institutions were able to outlive them and they're able to pass them forward, right? And if I compare the way that Christ chose to establish his church, and it's in the context of the Roman Empire, right? Here he pushes, rather than participating and trying to take over these Roman institutions, he pushes them to say, give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what is God, right? And you notice that even though like the followers of Jesus are kicked out of the temple, because there's this entire temple structure, right? There's this, it's an institution and a religion that the Jews are following, but then they start building their own parallel network, right? And with the collapse of Jerusalem and the collapse of the temple, that system falls and dies away. Their system remains, right? So they successfully built these parallel institutions, and how are they able to enact this trust, right? What kind of man was the one who's supposed to become custodians of this new foundational institution? If people are going to rebuild the societies, if people are going to rebuild the community, you will have to start with a foundation, and I think that the foundation is the priestly class, right? You need a pillar and a foundation for the truth, and then you need people to be able to run that institution, to be custodians of these things. And I think that's now we will now fall into the idea of the bishop, or you can use the word elder, or you can use the word shepherd, right? And the function of the bishop, the function of the shepherd, is to guide humanity forward. So there are these ultimate values, these ultimate truths that people are supposed to walk in and conform with. So there is a logos to reality. We need to be able to discern it, to see it, and then we need to orient ourselves towards it, right? Well, in Chinese philosophy, Taoism in specific, they are really big on this point that there is a Tao, right? And the Tao is the order, and you have to flow with the Tao, right? And so in the Bible, the system was described in this way, that you have got an overseer and a bishop, and then they are aided by deacons. So the overseer is focused on the ultimate values, and then the deacons are more concerned with the practical concerns that stems from the institution pursuing these ultimate values, right? And you can read it in 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. It's also in Titus, it's in Peter. There's certain way, the way they describe the type of man who's supposed to be that, to conform to this image, the type of man who's supposed to run this institution. I think that the criterion used in our society has fallen short of what it ought to be, right? So for instance, if we look at 1 Timothy 3, 1-7, let me just check it out. Okay, yes. History that anyone who desires to be a church official, right? There is very beautiful one that ties into the ones that they use, that use words that I've been using as well. Because church official is not the abstraction that I'm trying to capture, right? Okay. So this is true. This is a true saying. Saying if a man desires the office of a bishop, right, he desires a good work. He desires to do a good thing. Right. I'll use another more modern translation, just in case that I may be accused of equivocating. Right. So let's say Webster's Bible. Let's say this is the word bishop. Pick up a more modern one. Church leader. That's in the Good News Bible. He desires. Okay. Yes. Bishop is the same idea. I'm hoping that I've expressed clearly by this point. So a church leader must be without fault. He must have only one wife, be sober, self-controlled, orderly. He must welcome strangers in his home. He must be able to teach. He must not be a drunkard or a violent man, but gentle and peaceful. He must not love money. He must be able to manage his own family well and make his children obeying with all respect. For if a man does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of the church of God? He must be mature in the faith so that he will not swell up with pride and be condemned as the devil was. He should be a man who is respected by people outside the church, so he may not be disgraced and fall into the devil's own trap. And so, when we look at this description, right, these are the kind of men that are the custodians of truth in our communities and in our societies. Right? What criterion are we using to decide who should be the men to guide us forward? And so, let's say, for instance, when people tell you to follow the science, do they know the full implication of what they are telling us? Because there's a distinction of the subject matter that science seeks to understand in the sense that we use it in a modern context with the logos, right? So there's not only the material concerns, but there are other concerns. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's not that you just need security, food, clothing, and shelter, right? There are other higher needs that will emerge as these other lower needs are being met. And because we have those higher needs, there's a class of people who are to tie all those things into an institution that orients us in that particular direction. So our self-actualization, right, comes from our priestly class, because they are to guide us in all truth. There's our pillar and the foundation of the truth. And so now, from the traditionalist perspective, there are other questions that might arise, right? And that, okay, yes, you have talked about the criteria that they put forth from the Bible, right? But then that's just one particular intellectual tradition in a particular region of the world, right? And I think what made me think that the biblical description of the class works much better than, let's say, what I would find in Eastern philosophy, right? It ties into the problem, the solution they give to the problem of nature and nurture, right? And particularly if man has been born good or evil, right? So is the virtual man born or made, right? And then what practices should the person who is in this office should participate in order to allow them to embody these ultimate values? And so I find that if you are in the mystic tradition, right, it pushes the priest class towards the visceral rather than the spiritual, right, to the subjective rather than the universal. I think that their intuitions have guided them towards a symbolic truth, but the mistake that the modern practitioners of the ideology that stems from those insights from their intuition is that they have taken a symbolic truth and they're treating it as if it's literal. Perhaps in the future I'll make a video on it, on why I think that their system, it's tied to thinking about perennialism, right? And the whole idea of commonality between religions and ideas, and certain religious ideas. Where do they come from, right? But then now we're focusing on the shepherd and what he's supposed to be like, the criteria that have been described. And then you notice now, how am I able to demonstrate that the priestly class of the modern world is not operating correctly? I would like to point out to the plight of the precariat to describe and to hopefully make the case that we have a malfunctioning false priestly class masquerading to be the real one. And what should serve in the place of that real masquerading class has been co-opted. Like those would have been the real deal have been co-opted, and they've been reoriented to work in the wrong social sphere, right? Guy Standing describes the plight of the precariat as consisting of four things, right? Four problems. They're dealing with this anger, they're dealing with anomie, they're dealing with anxiety, and they're dealing with alienation, right? But then when you have meaning and significance, right? When you have a mission, a grand goal, a grand project and adventure, you notice its theme is away these feelings, right? Particularly anomie, right? Why is it that, well, if you're, wait, who's this sociologist? Okay, I'll remember his name. But he studied suicide. It's in the first sociology class. People always mention him. Durkheim, yeah, Durkheim. Like, in his studies, when he talked about how, like, people who come from these religious communities, right, how they're better able to deal with anomie, and that results with them having lower suicide rates, right? And how the community deals with the pressures, because in life and the struggles, like there is suffering in life, there is struggle in life, and there are pressures that will come from that. But then how are you able to deal with it and stand against, how are you able to deal with it and stand against it, and to be able to push forward despite of all of it? So when I compare with that, there's a particular region I visited, and there was this project by the World Bank where they built a water tank. And the people who were there, they were making jokes about it because it was empty, right? And it's like, yeah, the World Bank looked to help people, but the local leaders, the local leaders misuse the money, right? So it was basically throwing money at the problem, and throwing the money at the problem is not enough, right? And now we have a view of what the priestly class is supposed to look like, and then we have an idea of what the shepherd is supposed to look like, and then I'd like to present on what I think the usurpers look like.